Hey, welcome back to Cream City. Actually, hang on, folks. If you are here because of Cream City Dreams, I have a big announcement. Cream City Dreams is becoming Gather, Connect, Create. And if you listen to the first couple episodes of Gather, Connect, Create, you'll hear me talk about why I made this shift and what I intend to do with this new podcast. But I just wanted you to know before I start this episode that you're in the right spot. I'm still Megan Schultz. I am still the host of this podcast that you came here for. It just has a new name and a new look. And eventually I'll get all of the backend stuff working. But you know what? One of the biggest lessons from Cream City Dreams was start small and start before you're ready. And so that's what I'm doing. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. Hello and welcome to Gather, Connect, Create, a podcast about belonging and about building it one small moment at a time. I am your host, Megan Schultz, and each week I'll share one simple, tangible way to gather people, to connect more deeply, or to create something meaningful. Whether that's with your friends, your family, your coworkers, or maybe even a few strangers who just might become friends. Because in a world that often feels divided and distracted, we all need spaces that bring us back to each other, to our curiosity and wonder, to our joy, and to the creative spark that makes us feel alive. So let's gather, let's connect, let's create, and let's do it together. I'm so glad you're here. Oh, friends, it is nice to be back on the microphone. If you have been listening for a while, you know that for the last few years, I have been hosting Cream City Dreams, a podcast about incredible Milwaukee women who are doing phenomenal things, big things, bold things, dreamy things for our city. And I have loved every minute of it. I have said for years on that pod that I will stop Cream City Dreams when I run out of incredible women to interview. And that's never going to happen. I have loved every conversation that I've had, every spark of joy that came from each of these women who are doing such unique and different things in our city, yet similarly doing their best to make Milwaukee a beautiful city for all of us. But I will say, over the last couple seasons, something else has started to tug at me. Something about these conversations about courage and creativity and community that went beyond Milwaukee. That was, something bigger than just the reach of this city. And in September, I turned 50. So what a perfect time for a pause. And I took a hiatus in the month of September from Cream City Dreams. And as I took that time to reflect, I was thinking about what lights me up and what brings me joy about doing the podcast that I could share maybe in a way that felt, more connective, a little deeper, more relatable. Not that the stories about these women weren't full of relatability or joy, and not that there wasn't inspiration inside of each of these stories, but I sort of started asking myself, what if I could make a podcast that was not just about hearing other women's inspirational stories or joyful stories, but what if we could actually do something together as a community to turn that inspiration into action? Some kind of small, tangible thing that listeners could take away from each episode, try on their own in a way that would bring them joy and in a way that might encourage or offer suggestion as to how they could create more of a sense of community and belonging and connection in their corner of the world, just like these women were doing in Milwaukee, but whether it was Milwaukee or not. And that question, that sort of curiosity, became the seed for this new season, or indeed this new podcast, Gather, Connect, Create. because I really see this show as a way to offer suggestion and help build community about finding ways to make our world a little brighter and a little closer, whether it's one conversation, one new creative project, one icebreaker, one gathering, whatever it is in that particular episode at a time. Because I don't think connection just happens. It's something that we have to cultivate. And it's something that we don't necessarily get from being online. Those who followed me on Cream City Dreams will know that I gave up social media for the month of June. I put myself to the test to see if I could do it and said on June 1st, I'm getting off. I'll be back on July 1st, but until then, see you later. And I still haven't been back on. As I was thinking about this trailer, I hopped over to the Meta website because I was sure that their tagline must say something about connection, and indeed it did. It said, building the future of human connection and the technology that makes it possible. And behind that tagline is a room full of people at tables with VR goggles on, touching the air or pointing at the air or whatever you're doing when you have VR goggles on, virtual reality. And I know there are some people in this world for whom virtual reality is a lifesaver, and they need that, and that's wonderful, and I'm glad that technology exists. But for the rest of us who may not necessarily need that to survive or to thrive, I'm not sure that that's the kind of human connection that we need. I don't know about you, but I am craving more in real life connection. I don't want a VR headset to bring me closer to other humans. And so I really do think we have to create this for ourselves. And I hope that if you've gotten this far, you are in that same boat, and that this podcast might inspire you to try some new things in your neck of the woods. I want to take this trailer just to give a little background about who I am and why, if you're new here, or frankly, even if you're not new here, because I didn't talk much about myself on Cream City Dreams. I was always interviewing other Milwaukee women, but I thought I would give a little context as to why gather, create, connect. What's the big deal? Where does that come from in me? Why does that spark so much joy? Why do those 3 words keep coming up as my mantra, as my values, as the words that I constantly come back to when I think about what's important to me? So as I said, I have been podcasting in Milwaukee since 2022. I've been living here since 2008 when my husband and I met, and I was on my way from Boston to California and plopped down in the Midwest for a couple years with the promise that we would only be here long enough to get my master's in counseling. Then we would get back to California, closer to my family, and that never happened, which is fine because I love Milwaukee. I fell in love with this city and the people who make up this city. Obviously, I had a podcast all about Milwaukee women, so it is a place near and dear to my heart. But I say all this to explain that I am a transplant here. And I was trying to count the number of places that I have lived in my lifetime, and I think I need more than 2 hands for the number of times I have moved from home to college, to a new city, to a new country. I've lived on 3 different continents, and in each of those places, finding a community was very, very important to me. And so I think I just began gatherings and began pulling people together because that's what I needed. I create the things that I need. And over the years, I have done that again and again, and I have learned things that work and things that don't work, things that work well and things that flop. And so I think all those experiences of moving and setting up home and starting over have given me, I don't want to say expertise, because there are many people in this world who have moved far more than a dozen times in their life, but it's given me enough experience that I feel confident that I can talk about gatherings. Also, from a young age, I was very involved in the planning of the gatherings, whether it was youth group retreats, work conferences, women's circles, writing groups, I have always loved getting to hear people's stories and understanding where they come from. In one of the bios I've written for something, I wrote down that I have never met an icebreaker that I don't like. I am that nut who will always raise their hand to participate in an icebreaker. I love those kind of get-to-know-you games. I love the silly, alliterative name games. I love silly prompts. I love anything that gets a group feeling more cohesive and like everyone is a part of that. And it's only been in the last couple years that I have figured out where this comes from in me, why I am like this. And I think I'll save that for another episode of the podcast when we talk about belonging and fitting in. But I think it came from one experience that I had as the new kid in second grade. So you'll have to stay tuned for a future episode to hear that story. But nevertheless, belonging, community, connection has always been key. And so when I think about what lights me up, what could I talk about forever, aka what could I have a podcast about, those would be the things. And so here we are. I want to say too that if you're following me from Cream City Dreams, you'll notice that I just sort of did a rebrand of that podcast. Not because I want that podcast to die, and by all means, I may well resurrect it. There will be interviews on this podcast as well, and most likely many of them will be still Milwaukee folks. But I felt like the theme and the intention behind Cream City Dreams, which was to inspire listeners through stories, is still the same. I still want to inspire dreamers. I'm just expanding the locale. So if you're here with me and this doesn't feel like what you were hoping for, you can always unsubscribe. I will not take offense. But I will say before you hit that unsubscribe button that I am hoping to put some of these ideas into practice in real life. And I do still live in Milwaukee. So if you're new to the pod and you live locally and you might want to join for some in-person meetups or at least hear about them, you are going to want to stay on or be on the newsletter. But also, fear not those who live far away, the newsletter is where I will likely drop extras, maybe discussion guides or PDF templates or other freebie giveaways that might relate to that week's suggestion. So you will want to get on the newsletter or stay on the newsletter to grab those as well. And I promise that I do not spam. I would not know how to spam if I tried. I just send out a newsletter once a week when I'm in season. Two of the biggest lessons that I learned from 3.5 years of interviewing women. Number one is say yes and keep saying yes. And number two is start before you're ready. I am here to say that I am doing both of these right now. I don't know exactly where this podcast will take me. I don't know exactly how it's going to look week to week. I'm hoping there will still be interviews. I know there will always be tips and suggestions and ideas, but I don't know much more than that at this point. And then I have to remember that we didn't know anything going into the start of Cream City Dreams. When I set that up with my dear friend Shelly Roeder, and she and I were envisioning what it could look like, in season 1, we had no idea. We asked our friends. We asked friends of friends. They said yes. And voila, we had a podcast. And it grew from there. And never could I have imagined that 3.5 years later, I would still be podcasting. In fact, I recently learned that 90% of podcasters stop before episode 3. And that less than 5% of podcasters reach 100 episodes. So I think I'm doing okay, folks. That said, imposter syndrome is real, right? There is always that imposter syndrome in my head anyway, that little voice in my head that says that this is already being done, that there are other people out there doing it better, who have a bigger audience, or who have books to back them up. And heck yeah, there are. And I hope you're following them too. And to that end, you will hear me hat tipping a lot of people all the time on this show because I think it's so important to be generous with our knowledge and those resources. Why work from a place of scarcity when there is so much in this world? Why be close-fisted or close-hearted when we could be generous? So I am likely going to cherry pick things I have seen others do or have tried myself based on an idea that came from somebody else. And then I will share that with you because I want you to go out and find them as well. I hope that this podcast also helps you discover other people who are doing cool things in this world, because we need more of this kind of work in the world. And I'm doing it because it brings me joy to share these things. And if it's just a handful of you listening each week and implementing these ideas in your corner of the world, and if there's even the slightest ripple of connection and joy where you live, in your scope, in your city, that is enough for me. All right, I said this show would have a little nugget of inspiration with each episode, and so here's what I want to leave you today. And this is going to sound rather self-serving, and maybe it is, but here's my tip of the week. Share this podcast with someone that you can make a commitment to listen to it with and to try these things with. What I have found is that I am so much braver at organizing events or pulling people together when I do it with a friend. Even if that friend isn't necessarily on the mic with me or up at the front of the room with me, even if that friend is just pushing me from behind saying, "You got this. You can do it. Let's do this together." I'm right there with you. So my challenge to you is to find that person in your life and share these episodes. Listen to them together, talk about them, and even try implementing them. I think I could spend an entire episode thanking those friends who have done that for me, but in particular, I just want to quick shout out to Nell Benton and Cheryl Kniesel, who have been my fearless champions here in Milwaukee. But there are so many. I don't know if anybody has seen this video, and I don't know who pointed me to this in the first place, but it's been on the internet circling around for years on leadership, and it's at a music festival, outdoor music festival on a hill, and some funny guy starts dancing all by himself on this grassy hill as they're watching the music. And the video is about leadership, and it's about sort of who starts a movement. And on the one hand, yes, the guy who gets out there first gets the credit for starting the movement, but this video is really about the second guy who comes up, because the second guy who comes up joins the first guy and just gives him a little more legitimacy. In fact, in the video itself, the voiceover says, "It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There is no movement without the first follower." And the voiceover guy goes on to say, "We're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow." It's a really poignant and funny video about this idea of just creating a movement. And I'll link to it in the show notes so that if you haven't seen it, you can go back and watch it. But I am so grateful to those people who have stepped up behind me so that I'm not the lone nut. And I would encourage you to look for those people in your life who you could start a mini movement with together. Whether you're the leader or the first follower, get up and dance, I say. Darn, I wish I could sample that in, but probably I wouldn't be allowed to do that. So find your person so that you can do this together, so that you can hold each other accountable, and so that you can start making ripples in your neck of the woods. All right, I will be back on the next episode of Gather, Connect, Create. Until then, friends, remember that this is more than a podcast. It's a practice for all of us. And now it's your turn. How will you gather, connect, and create this week? And if you do something that creates just one ripple, I'd love to hear about it. And share it. Let's be generous with what works. See you next time.